fudge.
How far is too far?
Oh, shit! Shit! Shove it straight up your ass! Take his ass! Would you say crap face? Dickhead, you asshole!
What are the limits to free speech?
Shit!
I'm just fucking with you, Daddy.
Fuck you!
He looks like a complete cop.
Who the fuck do you think you are?
What's protected under free speech?
Pull it out your bunghole.
I'll blow it out your ass.
That bitch!
Bitch.
Shit.
Shit.
Shit. This stinks.
What can we say? And when?
Oh shit, what?
And where?
Shit.
Eat shit and die, Ricky! Eat shit and live, Bill.
Will I get in trouble for making this video?
Fuck, shit, cock, ass, titties, butter, bitch, mouth, pussy, cock, butthole, Barbara Streisand! Jesus, fuck me! Don't fuck with me.
And this is just one civil liberty. What about the others?
This rap is deep shit. Bastards.
That's my shit.
Bullshit. Sons of bitches. Let's kick some ass.
What about the other 9?
Holy shit! Fuck him!
Jesus Christ.
Bullshit!
Pussy, you squitty little shitty snot-nosed bastard.
Watch my mouth! Got any shit?
Shit.
Oh shit!
What a douche. Douchebag. I'm telling you, said crap.
Hey everyone, welcome to our second to last government lecture, the penultimate lecture. Today we talk about civil liberties, aka the Bill of Rights, also known as our first 10 amendments. Now, while we're not going to be covering every amendment, we'll be looking at the limitations and differences in a few today, and a few prominent court cases you should know about that have expanded or limited our civil liberties. Now, a lot of this lecture might feel like review, and if it does, good, because we're going back to the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. But this time, we're smarter, stronger, and hopefully we smell better. What are civil liberties? They are your protections from the government. These are your basic rights and freedoms guaranteed through the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. Remember, without these amendments, there would be no constitution. While creating a new government, the founders established in order to separate themselves from a monarchy or an abuse of government power, the people need to know they can say and do things without worrying about if the government would send them to jail. So just one more time, civil liberties protect you from the government, and they are the first 10 amendments. But how are we supposed to trust that we're protected from the people who are giving us these protections? That's where the Supreme Court comes in with court case examples. So let's start with the First Amendment. While it's known as the Free Speech Amendment, do not let that be the one shining star. There's more to this cookie than just chocolate chips. One Direction is more than just Harry Styles, and the First Amendment is more than just free speech. There are 5 rights within the First Amendment: speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. We have the right to say we live in a fascist nation without worrying about normal fascist nation consequences. We can yell at our representatives while they scarf down a hot dog.
Senator, thanks for all the hard work you do for Wall Street and big insurance. Here's a little something extra for you.
Vote no tomorrow when there's more on the way. Thanks for killing healthcare reform.
We can say Delaware is the worst state in the history of this galaxy and not worry about a drone strike. We have the right to practice the religion of our choosing, publish classified documents and editorials. We have the right to protest and the right to create our own petitions to get elected officials recalled or get our own initiatives on a ballot. Now, there are limits that you should know about with this amendment. Of course, the biggest that I just can't say enough is that our First Amendment protects you from the government, not from your employer or any business that you take part in. You can still be fired, you can still be denied service, or you can have your account banned. While free speech is protected, there are 4 exceptions that go case by case. First, libel or slander. A false statement with the intention of attacking one's character. Libel is written, slander is said. Today we call this defamation. While this is meant to protect individuals from lying and hurting someone's character, it's especially hard to prove in court because you have to show evidence of the intent to attack your character, how it's false, and you have to prove what damage it's done to you. So while there are plenty of defamation cases, like when a video goes viral showcasing someone's bad behavior, it's hard to prove they intended to make you look bad, and that it's a lie, and that it harmed you. One of the people to do it successfully, twice, is Tom Cruise. Once in 2003, when an adult film actor claimed he had an affair with Tom Cruise, and the magazine AccuStar published it, and the next from The Sun that published Tom Cruise had abandoned his daughter. Cruise made the case in both circumstances that they harmed his stance in the Church of Scientology and was awarded $10 million in damages. Next, obscenity. What is considered obscene? The definition is still pending. Obscene is very subjective, and even what one person might see as obscene, another might see it as holding artistic value. This was the case in Jacob Ellis v. Ohio, when theater manager Nico Jacob Ellis was advertising a poster for a movie called The Lovers. In the movie, it shows a woman having an orgasm. The town was incredibly upset, and eventually the state had to defend the case, calling the movie pornographic. This led to an oral argument questioning what is pornography, to which Justice Potter Stewart said, "I know it when I see it." 10 years later, in another court case, the slap test was created to decide if something was obscene. So if anyone claims an image or language as obscene, the Supreme Court asks, does it lack scientific, literary, artistic, and/or political value? Does it slap? And that now leads us to symbolic speech. Speech meant to represent something else or to send a political message is not protected. Symbolic speech was ruled as uncovered 30 years ago in a flag burning case called Texas v. Johnson.
Today's ruling involved this demonstration during the Republican National Convention in 1984, a demonstration that included the burning of the American flag. Gregory Johnson drew a $2,000 fine and a year in prison for violating a Texas law that makes the desecration of the flag a felony.
He violated a Texas law that prohibits vandalizing respected objects. Johnson made the case it was a symbolic act and protected under the First Amendment. Texas asked the Supreme Court to review the case. The Supreme Court ruled, not everyone holds the same respect for the same objects, and we're allowed to differ.
Today, the Supreme Court ruled such laws violate the First Amendment right to free speech and set aside Johnson's conviction.
I think it's an important victory that, it's tremendous that the government was forced to back off.
The court was sharply split. Justice William Brennan for the majority. The government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds it offensive or disagreeable. That would dilute the freedom that this cherished emblem represents.
Burning the flag, if it does not cause physical harm to anyone else, is protected. But not every symbol of speech is. You cannot violate another law, like committing arson or murder, as an act of symbolic speech. Burning the flag does violate US flag code, but then again, so does wearing the flag as underwear. Finally, false advertising. Commercial speech cannot deceive the public. It's why we have itty-bitty font at the end of commercial, or why cereal companies have to say chocolate-y instead of chocolate. A recent example of this was Red Bull had to settle multiple class action lawsuits in the US and other countries after their advertisement claimed Red Bull gives you wings. But that was only part of it. Red Bull also claimed that they are a superior energy drink to any other.
Red Bull gives you wings.
One man filed a lawsuit that claimed, I have been a faithful consumer of Red Bull for years, but I have not had any physical advantage or superior source of energy after drinking the product. This led to a class action lawsuit where Red Bull had to pay out $13 million, and anyone who could prove they purchased a Red Bull from 2002 to 2013 was either given a $10 check or $15 credit for Red Bull products. Another way freedom of speech is limited is if your speech creates a clear and present danger. For example, in Schenck versus the United States. Charles Schenck, that socialist, claimed the World War I draft violated the 13th Amendment and was a form of involuntary servitude. So he passed around pamphlets saying to dodge the draft. Chuck Schenck was caught and charged with trying to damage the US military. Chuck Schenck made the argument, hey, it's a free country, I'm protected by the First Amendment. The Supreme Court ruled, nope. Especially in times of war, certain rights and liberties are limited during times of war, and Chuck Schenck's actions could potentially create a danger. What this court case did was say that speech creating a clear and present danger is not protected by the First Amendment. This is also considered the shouting fire in a crowded room test.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm. What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure? Stay calm!
Now let's take a look into a few court cases that mostly expanded people's First Amendment rights. First, Engel v. Vitale. New York established public schools should open the day with a prayer and said if you don't like it, you can leave. Leave the classroom, that is. One brave parent, Steve Engel, said, no, my child shall stay. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, and that applies to states too. The school argued, since students had the option to opt out and since no God is personally named, they are not respecting any establishment of religion. The big question was, can a public school sponsor religious activities? Does the Establishment Clause also apply to states? The Supreme Court ruled the school is sponsoring religious activities by having students opt out instead of opt in. And school sponsorship of religious activities violates the Establishment Clause. States must obey the First Amendment too. Let's follow this with another religious court case, Wisconsin v. Yoder. Jonas Yoder wished to take his child out of school after 8th grade and claimed it violated his Amish religious beliefs. Wisconsin said, well, too bad. At first, Yoder and company also said, well, too bad, and we're going to take their kids out of school anyway, despite any legal consequence. But then, a Lutheran minister gave the Amish community more resources, including legal representation, citing that Wisconsin was violating their religious freedom. The question was, does Wisconsin violate the First Amendment by criminalizing parents who refuse to take their kids out of school for religious reasons? The Supreme Court ruled yes. Compelling Amish students to attend school past the 8th grade violates the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment. Wisconsin was limiting the liberty to freely exercise the religion of their choice. States cannot force individuals to attend school when it infringes on their First Amendment rights. In this case, the state of Wisconsin interfered with the practice of a legitimate religious belief. Not all beliefs rise to the demands of the religious clause of the First Amendment. There needs to be evidence of true and objective religious practices. Our next court case involves freedom of the press in the New York Times versus the United States. The failing New York Times wished to print classified information, further known as the Pentagon Papers. These papers detailed that the United States was in a losing war with Vietnam, but the government continued to lie to the people and say it's going A-OK. Nixon's administration warned the New York Times and the Washington Post that they would be publishing classified info and that Nixon had prior restraint, meaning the government could censor the press if it was for the good of the people.
Hello. Mr. President, the Attorney General's called a couple times about these New York Times stories, and he's advised by his people that unless he puts the Times on notice, he's probably going to waive any right of prosecution.
You mean to prosecute the Times?
Right.
Hell, I wouldn't prosecute the Times. My view is to prosecute the goddamn pricks that gave it to him.
Yeah, if you can find out who that is.
Yeah, I know. I mean, could the Times be prosecuted?
Apparently so.
The tremendous question here was, can the government censor the press by arguing it's for the good of the people? The Supreme Court ruled in this case, no. The people have the right to know, and the press is an extension of the people's voice and a source of knowledge. What this case did was it established a heavy presumption against prior restraint, even in cases involving national security or classified documents. The press is free to use classified and anonymous sources. What wouldn't be protected was if the press released government intel about a planned drone strike. But a past one, that's fair game. Finally, the last court case that expanded free speech is Tinker versus Des Moines. In the 60s, public school hippie students thought it would be super cool and groovy to protest the Vietnam War by wearing peace signs on black armbands. The Des Moines School District said, "Get that out of my face, you're suspended." Hippie. The hippie Tinker said, "You're violating our First Amendment rights, man."
I was growing up pretty much an ordinary child in Des Moines, Iowa. My father was a Methodist minister, and there were 6 kids in our family. My parents believed in putting their faith into action. And so that led them to get involved with the social gospel movement of the time. We just knew that when we looked at the TV in the evenings, we would see Walter Cronkite and the newscasters with photos of these very powerful scenes of the war. The children running from their burning huts, and soldiers in body bags, and the Vietnamese running, and the coffins with the flags. And it was very, very powerful for us. I felt very emotional, like kids do today. The black armbands were for mourning the dead in Vietnam on both sides of the war. And that's what made it so controversial.
Does prohibiting the wearing of armbands in public school as a form of symbolic protest violate the First Amendment's freedom of speech protections? The Supreme Court ruled yes. Wearing symbolic clothing can be a form of free speech, and you have the right to wear black armbands in school to protest the Vietnam War, as long as it's not intrusive to the academic day. What this case did was give students certain free speech rights as long as they're not intrusive to the academic day or providing harm to the community. So those are the prominent cases breaking down the Free Exercise Clause, the Establishment Clause, free speech, and free press. Our next 2 court cases deal directly with the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Since firearms functions and accessibility have evolved so much since the 1700s, liberals today focus on the well-regulated militia part, and conservatives argue the rights of the individual to keep and bear arms. The Supreme Court and federal government have left most states to decide what their firearm laws look like, and this was all after a little case called the United States versus Lopez. High school senior Alfonso Lopez had a gun in his backpack, was caught, and charged under Texas law for bringing a gun to school. The federal government got involved and said, "Oh no, we are going to charge Lopez for a federal crime because he violated the Gun-Free School Zone Act of 1990. At the time, there was a federal law that banned firearms from being anywhere near schools. Lopez's lawyer said, "Oh no. The Gun-Free School Zone Act is an abuse of power. It shouldn't exist in the first place." But then the federal government said, "Oh no, just kidding. We can create a Gun-Free School Zone Act because it's supported under the Commerce Clause. Having guns affects the commerce of an area. See?" Lopez's lawyers were making the case that the federal government abused their power by banning guns from state schools, and the federal government was making the argument that they could make any law that impacts commerce within that area. So, was the Gun-Free School Zone Act an abuse of power? The Supreme Court ruled yes. The Gun-Free School Zone Act is an abuse of federal power, and using the Commerce Clause to support it is a stretch. Therefore, no state has to obey it. Follow your own state firearm laws. And as early as 2010 in McDonald versus Chicago, the Supreme Court ruled that individual could own a gun despite state and local government bans if it's for lawful purposes like protecting your own home. While after most mass shootings in the US, there is a call for stricter federal gun control laws, the Supreme Court, in its current makeup, pushes back against those gun control laws, with Thomas and Alito wanting to fight even harder for the individual's right, stating the Second Amendment is treated as a second-class right. While we'll go into more detail about Amendments 4 through 7 when discussing civil rights, let's quickly cover that pesky Third Amendment. So what about the Third Amendment? Do you see any soldiers quartered in your house? If you ever date someone in the military and want to break up, just say, sorry, I'm a firm believer in the Third Amendment. There should be no soldiers in my house without my consent. It goes without controversy so far. It has been used to make the argument for privacy in the United States. The biggest court case is Griswold v. Connecticut in the 1960s. Little old lady Estelle Griswold wanted Planned Parenthood clinics to have contraceptives in Connecticut. Little old Connecticut had this 1800s law forbidding the sale or use of contraceptives, birth control. Griswold argued it violated a woman's equal right to privacy of her own health decisions. The Supreme Court ruled in a 7-2 decision for Griswold, stating that the right to privacy is a form of penumbris. It's in the shadows of our explicit laws and therefore implied by our Third Amendment. Now let's shift to those final three because depending on what state you're in, these ones can also change. The Eighth Amendment, no cruel or unusual punishment or excessive fines. What's excessive and cruel or unusual is left up to the state. It's why the death penalty is allowed in some states but not in others. It's why fines for crimes are so circumstantial. Although the federal government bars anyone 17 and under from being executed, like we learned in Roper v. Simmons. As for the Ninth Amendment, this one is important for our implied rights, for our penumbris. The Ninth Amendment ensures that you don't lose certain rights just because they're not specifically granted to you or mentioned elsewhere in the US Constitution. We have the right to eat junk food, we have the right to pursue whatever job we want, use our money how we wish, get whatever haircut we like. While that example might be extreme, we have the right to marital privacy or any kind of privacy through the Ninth Amendment. The right to pursue the education of our choice, the right to travel where we like in the United States. This is what we call the implied rights, the Penumbris Amendment. Finally, the 10th Amendment. This argues that states have any power not listed in the Constitution. This is the go-to amendment for originalists, because if it's not stated in the Constitution, states, you have the power to decide healthcare laws, pollution laws, minimum wage, death penalty, abortion, and plastic bag taxes within your state. This amendment keeps the federal government small. Each amendment in the Bill of Rights has its limits and twists and turns. Each liberty hits a wall when we're talking about the good of a whole community. So often, our personal liberty is restricted during times of war, during a pandemic, or during a natural disaster. So although we talk about free speech and privacy, the argument can be made that our information being tracked and listed due to our Patriot Act is constitutional because it's for the protection of the community. And the definition of our civil liberties, or what they encase, has changed with the times. There was no internet, contraceptives, AR-15s, or Red Bull in the 1700s. So even a strict interpretation of the Constitution must open the door to protect the people. While civil liberties are defined as protections from the government, the more persistent question is, what protects us from ourselves? And that's where civil rights come in, but that's for next week. I'll end this lecture by saying people might roll their eyes at our civil liberties when, of course, each has been limited or deemed circumstantial in the past. But our ability to criticize the extent of our civil liberties is protected by our civil liberties. There are nations still fighting for many of these rights, and there are marginalized groups here doing the same. But these civil liberties are a goal for a free nation. At least freer. Thank you for watching. Godspeed.